So
That's amazing.
if schools are not teaching it, who is? I think your credit card company is teaching financial responsibility?
And the other 45 states are open market.
They don't really have any financial requirement. They don't have any requirement to teach financial education. So the school system is failing our youth in that they are not teaching on one of the most important aspects of our time, just being a responsible adult, right? And that has led to a lot of things in this country. 46% of this country cannot come up with $400 if they needed it.
How many?
46% could not come up with $400 in the event of an emergency. 76% of the country lives paycheck to paycheck, where they'd be homeless if they were out without a paycheck for a month. So the lack of education in this country is crippling us, right? And that's why we are on a crusade here in what I do in my business to provide that education, teach people, and I hope to impart a little bit of that here. So these 7 principles, right? Number 1, pay yourself first. Start thy purse to fattening. For every 10 coins you place in your purse, take out for use but 9. Basically, he's saying here, save 10% of your income. And not just 10% of your income, but your first 10%. None of your debtors care about whether you reach your future goals. Wells Fargo doesn't care where you end up in 20 years as long as you pay your mortgage, right?
Right.
You need to make sure your family and your future is your first priority. Then worry about the debts, right? Warren Buffett once said, do not save what is left after spending, spend what is left after saving. Whereas in this country, we've got that flipped upside down, and we go out and we spend and we spend and we spend, and then at the end of the month, if there's anything left, I'll save it. And that's why we have those statistics, right?
Wow.
So, is 10% enough? Or this is the rule of thumb in 1926. 10% enough? Maybe. Right? The real answer, as with many things in finance, is it depends. Right? Some demographics in 1926. The average age was about 60. For black males, it was upper 50s. For white males, it was lower 60s. The average age was about 60. We were in the middle of the industrial era, right? So you'd go to high school, you'd get out of high school, you'd go work for a factory, you'd work for that factory for 30, 35, 40 years. You'd retire, you'd get a nice pension that would sustain you for the last 5 to 7 years of life. The personal savings was only meant to plug the gap for that 5 to 7 year period of what your pension didn't cover. Well, here we are in 2017. On the front page of your Social Security statement, it says that well's going to run dry by 2034 unless major changes are made. Pensions are basically non-existent these days. It's all up to your personal savings. Right? So this goes back to having a vision. Right? This is important for not just an entrepreneur, but for every family as well. Know where you're going. Right? The first thing I do with my clients is sit them down and we have a discussion about their goals and their vision. What does your future look like? What do you want it to look like? Harvard did a study back in the 50s of all recent college grads and 22, 23-year-olds, right? Probably no surprise, only 3% of them had clear long-term career goals. 30 years later, they followed up. The 3% that had those clear goals had more combined net worth than the other 97% combined.
Wow.
The power of knowing where you're going, right? So that's the first thing I do with my clients is help them understand where they're going. Define and achieve financial freedom. You got to define it before you know where you're going. So the true number there, right? The point here of this first bullet is define where you're going. Quantify your goals. And my family is 31%. We tithe 10%, we save 31%, and then we live off the other 59%. Right? Financial stewardship. So once you've identified that number, what's step 2? Control your expenses. Basically having a budget, right? One of the foundational things I do for my clients is we create a budget. Budgets don't pay me, right? But it helps that family create a foundation where they know where their money's going. And that will allow them to save the number we identified in step 1. So then you get to bullet point number 3 there. Like once you know your number, once you've identified where it's coming from in your budget, now what are you going to do with it? All right, this gets to do you bury your talent in the ground, or right? There's 3 concepts that I view long-term savings from. Offense, defense, properly taxed. Offense is grow it, defense is protect it. Properly taxed means keep more of what you earn instead of getting a chunk of sand, right? Legally, of course.
Of course.
Of course, yeah. So make thy gold multiply. What does that mean, right? What does it mean to grow your money? Well, this gets to the whole lack of financial education thing. You're looking at the sheet in front of you, the rule of 72. Who here knows what that is? Awesome. Wonderful. Yeah. So this is a very basic, and I give a seminar similar to this on a weekly basis in my office. I would say 95% of the people that come through that seminar have never heard of this. I had a financial professional in the room a couple weeks ago who had never heard of the rule of 72. But it's simple. You take the number 72, you divide it by your interest rate, and that's how long it takes your money to double. So if you're in a high yield, right, savings account at 1% per year, the rule of 72 says your money's going to double every 72 years. 72 divided by 1. So if you got $10,000 in that account at 29 years old, you're going to be 101 before that money doubles. You think that's funny, right? No, that's good.
Like you say,
What a reaction, yeah.
101.
Now,
That would only work for Methuselah.
Yeah.
even more to the point, most people don't have their money in a high yield savings account. It's just sitting in their checking or savings.
Right.
The average, you go to bankrate.com, you can look up these numbers. The average savings account in this country right now is paying 0.09% per year. And that's savings account. So let's round that up to 0.1. If you're getting 0.1 per year in your savings account, how long does it take your money to double?
Never.
72 divided by 0.1.
Yeah, that's a long time.
720 years.
I was going to say
Yeah.
never. That's why I said
Never,
never.
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 And now, you're basically sitting in an account that's a guaranteed place to lose money, because plus inflation, 2 to 3% per year. So the money in that account is losing value at 2 to 3% per year, and it's just not growing.
Because it's not even matching inflation.
Exactly.
That's right.
Right. So then what do you do, right? And that gets down to what the objectives and goals and stuff like that are, but you know, most of my clients are in an emergency fund that makes 3, 4, 5% per year. I was looking at some of the numbers yesterday. I got a client who opened up an emergency fund last year. She's made 8.8% in an emergency fund in the last year. So that's, you're not going to get that in the bank, right? So the point is, let's say your emergency fund does 4%. 72 divided by 4, your money's doubling every 18 years. So now you go from 10 to, well, this is a different scale, 5 to 10 to 20 by the age of 65, right? Instead of waiting until you're 101. Right? If you get 6% per year, your money doubles every 12 years, right? Now you go from 20 to 40,000 in that same period of time. So a 2% bump, you double the amount of money in that account. Well, what if you go from 6% to 12%? Double your rate of return. You're not just doubling the amount of money there, you got 8 times the amount of money in that same period of time. That's what Einstein called the 8th wonder of the world, compound interest. But the most important thing here is not the return, because you can't always control what that's going to be, right? That's not under your control. You can control what you do with the time you have in front of you. Time can be your greatest ally or your worst enemy, depending on how you use it or don't use it. Right? So know where you're going, create a plan, and take advantage of compound interest over time. And that's what this high cost of waiting is meant to show. You know, if you have a goal of having $1 million by age 65 and you're 25, you got a 40-year window. At 8% per year, that means $286 a month. We would make you a millionaire, right, by 65. But people are creating bad habits over time. Right? What are we doing in our 20s? Right? Okay, thanks.
115.
Yeah. Okay. So what are we doing in our 20s? Right? Money at the bar, a nicer car, better place to live, etc. We haven't been taught all this stuff, so we don't think about the long-term financial. And we just kick that down the road. Right? Fast forward 10 years, you're in your mid-30s, now you got more necessary expenses. You got kids, you got a wife or a husband, you got a mortgage, right? You get all these things that are now required. So it's like, well, I'll worry about this later, right? Mid-40s is about where most people in this country seriously start thinking about that next stage of life. They finally kind of wake up to the fact that they either don't want to work forever, they're just physically not going to be able to. Well, now if you're starting in your mid-40s, you're looking at $1,700 a month with the same goal, rather than $286. And a lot of people will stick their head in the sand, well, I can't do that, right? Why try? Maybe I'll win the lottery. But the reality is, the longer you wait, the exponentially worse it gets. So no matter where you are, take advantage of the time you have in front of you. Why are people not doing these things? Why are people not taking advantage of these seemingly simple concepts?
Lack of knowledge.
Lack of knowledge.
Hosea 4:6.
Lack of education. And lack of knowledge and lack of education leads to fear. Fear of the unknown. I mean, in finance and investing is one of those things. You go online and you Google something, you're going to get 3,000 different opinions, right?
Right.
And it paralyzes people. Like, well, who do I believe? Right? And that fear is not necessarily unfounded either, right? Take a look at what happened back in 2008, 7 and 8. The market crashed 50%, down 56 at its worst. But if your money loses 50%, what do you got to make just to get back even? Not 50, you got to make 100.
Right.
If you lose 50, you got to get 100 to get back where you started. And the market did that twice in that 12 or 13 year period after 2000. Down 50, up 100, down 50, up 100. Right? And that's a ride a lot of people will kind of get a little queasy with over time. And then after you adjust for inflation, you actually would have been down 21%. So people don't know where to turn, right? Where do I go? What do I do? Right? And without getting too much into the weeds here, there are a lot of options, for what you can do, but they fall into different buckets, right? The exact bucket you should use depends on where you are, what your goals are, what your objectives are, what stage of life you're in, etc. But that gets to the whole defensive aspect as well.